And I want to talk about a major national project that we've been doing for ALT that is very poorly titled the Academic Workforce 2020. And the word academic is now the problem with the original title for this project. I'll come back to that soon. There are people in the room who are contributors to the project: David Sadler, Sarah Booth, Kerry Lee Krause, Gregor Kennedy, Marnie, if she's here. I haven't seen Marnie Hughes-Warrington, and others. They're responsible for the project, but not for the presentation, because that was finished at about 6 a.m. This morning. If we are to transform higher education in the way we've been talking about today, then we probably have to rethink the workforce, and the teaching workforce in particular. So this project is fundamentally about what will the workforce look like, how will we train, support and recognise teaching in the higher education work of the future. We've reached the conclusion that the only way to think about this is in terms of, one way to think about this is in terms of the differentiation of work that's going on within teaching and learning, the differentiation of work. The other way to think about this is in the professional recognition of the people who contribute to teaching in higher education. Both of these points, in various ways, have already popped up in the conversation this morning. I now have 21 points that you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to read out. But the 21 points take you through the logic of this project. Some of the points are self-evident and won't need explanation. I apologise for the lack of subtlety. With a 10-minute presentation, there is no time for nuancing. If you want to tackle me on any of the points, just remember the number, and then I can quickly go back to them in the discussion. So I'm not going to dilly-dally, and sorry, I'm going to generalise. And I'm going to assume that you can read quickly enough that if I give you 30 seconds per slide, you'll make sense of these. There are none of the first 5 points do I wish to speak to today, because for me, many of these are self-evident aspects of our context. Many of these we've already reflected on in part today. If you want to challenge any of them, we can go back to them later. How are we going there, David? I'll use you as the lowest common denominator when it comes to... You through them?
I'm through them.
Good.
And I take your comment.
The point of this one, of course, is quality and standards, whichever way you look at them, are going to be paramount. Students are going to focus on them in ways that they perhaps haven't in the past. So what about the professionalisation of teaching in higher education? Well, here this gets a bit more complicated, and I perhaps need to say a couple of things about this slide. The most important point in many ways is to do with points 8 and 9, point 9 in particular, and that is we have created a rather balkanised workforce, and I now regret not including professional staff in my articulation of this point. Already today we've talked about real academics, if you like, the casual workforce, and our professional staff. I think Kerry Lee referred to professional staff at UWS as the blended learning professionals, or at least one category of professional staff. The way in which we've created this balkanised higher education teaching workforce has, in my view, been largely unplanned. It's occurred incrementally. And we haven't stood back and thought, how would we use our teaching professionals if we were to start building our universities and our higher education providers from scratch? Please, I apologise for the broad generalisation that's inherent in that, but you can see my point, I hope. So after that broadly bleak assessment about what I would call the modest levels of professionalisation of higher education teaching, what might we do about this? Well, for me, the obvious starting point is to think about what kind of learner-centric models of provision we would like to build from the future, into the future. And again, in my view and that of members of the team, already we can see that teaching is becoming more of a team-based activity, and how we utilise different skills within a team becomes the pathway to efficiencies and effectiveness. So it is about how we differentiate and recognise more specialised, more focused workforce roles, and therefore more specialised and focused careers potentially. In order to do this, we fundamentally have to rebuild our ideas of professional identity within the higher education teaching workforce. And again, I regret using the word academic in the articulation of point 13. That's an error on my part. Now, linked to that is something that Belinda's probably going to talk more about in terms of the pre-reading, and that is the pathways to new forms of professional identity are intimately associated with new ideas of scholarship, and how we might rethink and recrystallise scholarship in higher education is part of the equation here. I'm going right for time. So getting down to what is a bottom line for this project. How do we create a more explicit forms of role differentiation and professional recognition within a differentiating workforce, which has, if you like, sub-professions within the overall profession? One way to look at this is to imagine that we will continue to have traditional academics, if you like, who obviously play a very important role. But we don't have a word yet that, in my view, adequately depicts the other people that we have contributing to teaching and learning. And I'm just teasing you really with the idea of starting to build a notion of paraprofessionals who work alongside our core academic professionals. I do wish I had a better word for this, but at the moment I don't. Point 16 is vitally important, and that is the people who have major leadership, coordination, management responsibilities for the design and delivery of teaching and learning are going to be central to the quality of the student experience and student outcomes. And how we invest in them is important to us. At the same time, how on earth are we going to do better in the area of educating, supporting and recognising this vast array of paraprofessionals who already contribute massive amounts to teaching and learning and the quality of student experience and outcomes, but at present are in many ways a marginalised group within our institutions. Final slide. There are no simple steps that can be taken to solve all of those challenges, but let me just refer to a few possibilities. Firstly, I believe we ought to intensify our efforts around preparing the people who are leading teaching and learning, the people who are creating the design. As part of that, I would really like the D-Dogs to get together and look at how we could develop a national approach to a PhD strand, which does focus on the educational skills and knowledge within the PhD as well as the research outcomes. And I'm not saying that there aren't programs of that kind already. Of course there are. Point 20 is also important. I would say at the moment we have an informal apprenticeship model in higher education. Some people benefit greatly from it, others miss out altogether. Why don't we think about having internships or apprenticeships such as the kind that other industries have become very comfortable with and very familiar with? The final point, 21, is really the big one here in many ways. We can all think about different ways of recruiting, training, supporting, and how we might do better across a complex teaching workforce. But to make this hang together, we do need a better way of recognising the professional skills and knowledge and qualifications of people who teach in higher education. We don't have a great mechanism at the moment. In fact, one might ask, what kind of knowledge and skills and qualifications do you need to teach in higher education? In many ways, it's anything goes. Right? Now, if we could get an Australian Higher Education Institute, a professional body going in a viable way, and I'm not going to try and put detail on it now, that would be inappropriate. In fact, I don't have detail to put on it yet. But it would be, ideally, voluntary. It would be not for registration. This is a professional body. It would be owned by the people who teach in Australian higher education, and it would equally serve a very differentiated teaching workforce. That would be the model. All right? Now, the starting place, in my view, is probably the most marginalised people within our workforce. Right? The people who are casual sessional appointees who are clinging to the periphery of our institutions. That would be an ideal starting point for building up the idea of a professional academy of some kind or other. We would know it was working well when casual staff, sessional staff, I have no other expression for them, embrace it and benefit from it. We'd know it's working well when universities and new HEPs use this recognition in their recruitment and promotion. And we'd know it was working well when TEXA is able to look at the profile of staff who teach in a program, and as one indicator might look at membership of the National Institute in order to meet the standards around the qualifications and skills of teaching staff in courses. Thank you.